Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. We'll give it a few minutes to allow attendees to join in. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. We truly appreciate you all being here. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to access the replay starting tomorrow. We'll send you all out an email. I wanted to quickly set expectations that although the webinar is scheduled for an hour, the goal here is to keep the presentation to about 20 to 30 minutes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and keep this focused and practical. Additionally, I want to start by saying this session is educational and informational. It's not a scare tactic presentation, and it's not about eliminating all risk, because that's not realistic in today's digital world. What we are going to talk about is how personal information ends up exposed online, why that matters more than ever, and what individuals can do better to manage that risk. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce myself and give you some context for today's discussion. My name is Joshua Gutierrez. I'm the Director of Digital Privacy. I lead NetReputation's digital privacy and identity protection programs, where I focus specifically on helping individuals and families reduce their personal data exposure and identity risk. I spent over a decade working in the digital privacy space with a specialization in data broker removals and digital footprint minimization. My work generally centers around understanding how personal information moves across the digital ecosystem, and more importantly, how to meaningfully reduce that exposure. In addition to supporting everyday individuals and families, I also advise higher risk and higher visibility individuals on long term privacy protection strategies, helping them think beyond short term fixes and sustainable risk reduction. So today's conversation isn't theoretical, it's grounded in the real patterns and challenge that we all see every single day. So, why this matters now? Why did you all join? According to data published by the Federal Trade Commission, more than 1.1 million identity theft reports were filed in the US in 2024 alone. In that same year, consumers reported over 12.5 billion in fraud-related losses. At the same time, fraud losses continue to rise year over year. These reported cases, which means that the real impact is likely higher, right? So the reality here is this: every major data breach has a downstream human impact on real people, real families, and real financial lives. So let's talk about that digital footprint that we're discussing today. So today, I want to walk you through what your digital footprint really looks like, how breaches affect individuals, what steps people commonly take on their own, and how some choose to manage that risk more proactively. When we talk about a digital footprint, we're talking about the trail of personal data you leave online. This includes information that exists outside of your direct control, often compiled across many different sources. How digital footprints are created. So, when we talk about a digital footprint, we're talking about something that's not abstract or theoretical. So, every time you have bought something online, you've signed up for a rewards program at your grocery store, downloaded an app, filled out a form, or even used social media, what you're doing is you're generating personal data. None of this requires a mistake from you. It's just simply how the digital economy works today. So, how exposure really happens. When we talk about digital exposure, it helps to break it down into two categories, just active and passive. So, when we're talking about active exposure, it's what you already knowingly share. So, that's social media posts, online purchases, form submissions, as we have mentioned earlier, things you intentionally enter into that digital system. Most people assume and are correct that this is where their risk comes from, but not all of it. So now, when we talk about passive exposure, these are the things that happen around you, often without your knowledge. So this is public records, data broker aggregation, which we'll talk about more in detail, third party data sharing, as well as breach related leaks. This is information you didn't actively decide to publish in any searchable format. And in many cases, passive exposure represents a much larger portion of someone's digital footprint than the content that they personally post. So the conversation about privacy isn't just about being careful online, it's about understanding how data moves even when you're not thinking about it. So, thinking about that data, where does that data go? In many cases, that data doesn't remain with a single company, like the company that you purchased something from online or the social media you used. It's collected, aggregated, shared, or resold through data brokers and people search services without any direct awareness. These profiles can include some really sensitive information, such as your name, current and past addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, even relatives, and also inferred demographic data. All right, so we've talked a ton, but what we want to do is take a moment of reflection for each and every one of you to pause and ask yourself. So instead of thinking about systems and statistics, go ahead and think about yourself. Think, when was the last time you searched your own name? Not just on Google, but across a people search platform like a Been Verified, like a My Life. Do you know how many data broker sites currently list your address, phone number, or even your relatives? A thing to think about too is, if a breach happened tomorrow at a company that maybe you've done business with, what would somebody be able to combine with existing data about you for potential impersonation? How quickly would you even know? These aren't hypothetical questions, they're practical awareness questions. Because as we have mentioned before, digital exposure isn't abstract, it's personal. So let that sink in for a moment. So, fraud has changed over the last few decades, and especially in the last few years. So for a long time, fraud was largely generic. We all know this, right? Mass emails, random spam, either text or phone calls, those were broad, low credibility attempts. I'm sure many of us still get many of those attempts today, and we're all pretty well equipped to know that we don't have a previously unknown inheritance somewhere overseas, right? But the reality is this: that's not how most fraud works today. Today's fraud is personalized. So, what do we mean by that? It relies on context, knowing something about you. It relies on credibility, referencing details that feel absolutely legitimate. And it relies on psychological triggers, urgency, authority, and familiarity. The difference between a scam that you immediately delete, right, like those text messages, and one that makes you pause is often just a few accurate data points away. And those data points are from aggregation. And that's why visibility matters. Attackers no longer guess, they research. So for an attacker, that data has value. From a fraud and social engineering perspective, this information isn't random, it's valuable. It enables targeting, impersonation, and social engineering. The more accurate the data, the more convincing the attack. All right, as you can see, there are a couple of headlines that we put here of breaches you may have heard. So when data breaches make headlines, they're often viewed as company, corporate, or executive problems, but it's different companies, same outcomes. According to publicly reported investigations and regulatory actions, major breaches in 2024 and 2025 exposed personal information associated with tens of millions of individuals. In one of the larger cases of AT&T, which I'm sure we have all heard about, publicly disclosed settlements related to customer data incidents totaled approximately $177 million, with reporting indicating that highly sensitive identifiers were involved. Similar breaches affected retailers, service providers, and even luxury brands in 2025. So while the industries vary, the outcome remains consistent: personal data entering criminal marketplaces. So let's talk about the breach timing reality. According to long running industry studies, it takes an average of 194 days to identify a breach and another 64 days to contain it. Again, 194 days to just identify the breach, but then another 64 to contain it. That's over 250 days. So what does that mean? That means attackers may have months, more than half of a year, of access or lead time before affected individuals are ever notified. So what does that delay mean? During that delay, data may already be circulating, combined with other sources, and already be actively misused. Notifications, if they come, often arrive well after exposure begins. It's when the money goes out that we generally see the issue. When we talk about breach timing, one of the most important concepts is what I call the notification gap. After a breach occurs, companies investigate. Internal teams assess impact. Lawyers then get involved. Regulators may even be notified. That's a process. And that process takes time. And during that gap, as we have mentioned previously, attackers may already be monetizing your data. What does that mean? They may already be testing credentials, already attempting impersonation, and combining data sets. So by the time a notification letter arrives at your door, that exposure may have happened months earlier. That timing gap is one of the least understood aspects of the modern data risk today. But what does this look like from a real world impact perspective? As stated earlier, according to FTC data, more than 1.1 million identity theft complaints were received in 2024. Can we just imagine what it was in 2025? Survey research cited by consumer protection organizations show that nearly 1 in 3 Americans, let me say that again, 1 in 3 Americans reports being scammed in the past year, with an average loss of approximately $1,600 per victim. However, identity theft isn't just financial. Multiple consumer and behavioral studies show elevated levels of risk, anxiety, and a lasting sense of violation among victims. Even when financial losses are recovered, the time required to resolve credit issues and restore confidence can be substantial. So, personally, right, let's think about this. Think about the last time you went to a restaurant or any establishment and had a really bad experience. Did you go back? And if you did, how long did it take you to feel confident again in that establishment? How much more when it relates to the financial security of you and your family? So let's break this down into some scenarios. So a common scenario generally looks like this. Breach data is combined with data broker information and your social media. What happens from that? A fraudulent account is maybe opened, or an existing account is taken over, often only discovered after damages occur. Again, we generally only see this when we see the money go out. So let's drill down a little bit deeper. How small pieces become big problems. So, with everything that we have talked about to this point, breaches, data points, social media, now let's walk through how this actually works in practice. So, a large company or enterprise breach leaks an email address and a date of birth. That information gets paired with data broker records online, which then fills in the address and the relatives of an individual. Social media then provides employment details and professional context. So think LinkedIn there. Now, a fraudster has enough information to create believable outreach. The individual, whether it be at a financial institution, a benefits provider, or even a family member, then responds because what? It feels legitimate. And that leads to account takeover or credit fraud. But let's notice something really important here. No single data set was catastrophic on its own. It's the combination, the layering. That's what creates risk. That's why it isn't about one piece of information. It's about how pieces are assembled. Think about this. This is an important one. How many times has your bank asked for your mother's maiden name to verify you? How hard do you think it is to find that information online? So, one task that we have for you all when you leave this webinar is see if you can find your mother's maiden name online. And you'll be surprised. It's actually fairly easy. So now we want to talk about higher risk individuals. So for individuals with higher visibility, such as business owners, executives, or public facing professionals, I know we have some on the call today, the exposure profile can be even riskier. Why? Because information is readily available online. Names are searchable. Professional roles are public online on company websites or LinkedIn. Organizations are listed within the bios. Family connections may even be visible online. So even if you're not active on Facebook and fairly private, Aunt Sally may have tagged you in a family reunion photo from 3 years ago. And you're right, a scammer would look for that. This doesn't mean higher risk individuals did anything wrong at all. It simply means their information is easier to locate and therefore easier to misuse. With all that, they are a stronger target. Let's talk about the multiplier effect. So, breaches, data brokers, and social engineering don't operate independently, as we have already discussed. Together, they create what we consider a multiplier effect that increases overall risk. So, why are we bringing this up? FTC reporting trends show that identity-based fraud continues to evolve as attackers combine information from multiple sources rather than relying on a single breach. It isn't that one time you made a purchase in Target and there was a Target leak. It's the combination of it all. Digital privacy today isn't about eliminating all exposure because truthfully, that's not realistic. It's about reducing unnecessary exposure and making misuse that much more difficult. In that sense, digital privacy protection has become a form of baseline personal risk management. So before we go into how people can protect themselves, which I know we're all very interested in, that's why many of us joined today, I want to talk about common myths about identity theft because this is an important piece. There are myths that tend to give people a false sense of security. I myself, before ever even joining this industry, I felt much of the same way as these myths. The first is I don't share much online. But as we discussed earlier, a significant portion of exposure is passive. Again, things you didn't put online, public records, third party aggregation, breach leaks, even on Sally's Facebook photo we mentioned earlier. The second myth here I'd know immediately if I was breached. Industry research consistently shows it can take months to detect and contain a breach. As we mentioned, over 250 days. That creates a window of exposure most people never account for. And the third myth, and this was a big one for myself as well, they need my social security number, right? In reality, attackers often don't need it. Emails, date of birth, employment details, and contextual information can be enough to execute convincing fraud attempts. Let's go back. Think about your mother's maiden name again, and how many times that's been the one defense layer before accessing your bank account or some of your private information over the phone. That one piece of information. So the risk today isn't about one sensitive identifier, it's about aggregated visibility. All right, so this is the good part, right? What people can do for themselves. We've been talking a ton about your risk, but now let's talk about what you yourself, who've joined this call, can do now to protect yourself. So, according to guidance from the FTC and other consumer protection agencies, people can use things like credit freezes, fraud alerts, multi factor authentication, password managers, and manual opt-outs from data broker sites. And all of these are all great practices. For us, when we're giving you advice on where to start, removing your personal data online is a great starting point. We believe privacy education should be accessible, so netreputation.com offers opt-out guidance for many of the most common data broker sites for free on our website. So that's the URL that you now see on your screen, as well as the screenshot of what the resource looks like. We'll also be sure to include that URL in the follow-up email, along with the on-demand replay of this webinar. It's really helpful to opt out of these data broker websites to minimize your exposure. Now, when you do go on this, a little bit of a spoiler alert, you'll see, 30 to 50 different articles of different sites. So now we bring up, why is all of this hard to maintain? So while individuals can take a do-it-yourself approach, the challenge here is scale and persistence. There are hundreds of data brokers and people search platforms, some linked to others, many appearing on the web overnight. Opt-out processes vary. They may even expire, and data can reappear when it's reaggregated or resold. Managing this manually often requires ongoing effort rather than one-time action. So simply put, for everyone, this isn't a one-time task. So where does NetReputation fit in all of this? At NetReputation, our digital privacy protection program is designed to help clients monitor personal data exposure, manage removal requests, and track reappearance over time. Additionally, as you can see, I'm not an AI bot. We offer human support and not just technology. We don't claim to prevent all fraud or eliminate all risk. What we focus on is reducing exposure, improving visibility, but most of all, supporting informed decisions. We don't eliminate risk. We work to reduce exposure. So without what clients experience after taking control and without reading each and every one of these reviews from our client, the common theme here is clear. A sense of peace of mind, knowing that personal information is protected and no longer readily available on these data broker sites. So as we come to the end of our webinar here, just a couple of key takeaways. You can't control when a large company is breached. It's also not going to stop you from shopping or transacting with these companies. But you can influence how exposed your personal information is when it happens. This is where professional support can help. You can't control data breaches, but you can influence your exposure. So as some next steps, if you'd like to learn more, request a data exposure review for yourself or for a family member, or ask questions. We're more than happy to continue that conversation. My QR code is on the screen where you'll have the ability to set up time on my calendar, and we can go into detail of what data privacy means for you individually. And as a thank you, as you saw in some of our marketing materials, we're offering a 20% discount for those who attended the webinar if you do decide to sign up for a digital privacy product. There were a few questions that we had, so let me bring some of these up. And before we let you go for today, we'll answer these. We've identified a few which we consider maybe top of mind for the majority of the group. All right, so for the first question we have is, how does AI, which is a big one, how does AI impact personal data exposure and identity risk? So that's a great question. So when you think about AI doesn't really create new information about you. it makes it easier and faster to connect the dots between information that's already out there. I think our concern is if I put my name on ChatGPT or another AI, will it bring up all my information? As of right now, LLMs do not capture personal data like that. That may change in the future, but as of right now, that's not how AI works. But if your email and let's say employment details or address or family information are all publicly accessible, what AI tools can do is it can aggregate that information pretty quickly and put it into something that's structured and potentially usable. I think the big one here, which I would like to talk about, I was talking about this with a colleague earlier, are deep fakes and impersonation. So if there's accurate personal information that exists online, and someone has that context, it makes attacks more convincing, if that makes sense. So, kind of to sum it up, AI doesn't invent risks, but it does amplify exposure that already exists. And it's a big reason why reducing how much personal information is easily accessible still matters, and why you need to be conscious of that. Right. I'm seeing another question about this is a good one as well. And we get this question a ton. If most of this information is technically public, is removal really possible? Again, a very fair question. So some information from public records, as we all know, some of this information does come from public records, and public records themselves don't really ever disappear. That's why they're public records. But what can be addressed often is how this information is aggregated, indexed, and made searchable through data broker platforms, right? So if you, not mentioning them specifically, but some data brokers may have things like arrest records, driver's license info, even deed information. So the goal here with digital privacy protection isn't to erase history per se or erase, that public record, but it's to reduce accessibility and visibility where possible. I think there's a meaningful difference between something existing in a physical courthouse archive or at the county clerk's office and being searchable in seconds online, right? Fraudsters generally look for low-hanging fruit in this regard. They're often not visiting your county courthouse, right? All right. Okay. Let me see this one. Okay, this is a really good one as well, regarding some regulations. So, does using CCPA or GDPR deletion rights eliminate the need for additional protection? This is a really great question, and we get this a ton. So, GDPR is, for everyone's knowledge and context, is the General Data Protection Regulation that went into effect in Europe in 2018. CCPA refers to California Consumer Privacy Act. So when we think about these, privacy regulations like CCPA and GDPR are meaningful. They're extremely important. What they do is they provide rights and accountability mechanisms. However, not every entity falls neatly under any of those frameworks, and in enforcement and data redistribution complexity can be extremely can vary, right? So for California specifically, a broker must actually be registered in California for them to fall under these regulations, which makes enforcement really murky. CCPA has been out for quite some time, but you still see data constantly appearing on the internet. So while regulatory tools like these are helpful, and we encourage everyone to use them, don't get us wrong, many individuals still choose ongoing exposure monitoring to complement those rights. So in California, here where I reside, the state recently rolled out what's called drop or delete request and opt-out platform, where California residents can put their name in government databases to process opt-outs. However, in a recent webinar from earlier this month, Tom Kemp, who's the executive director of the CCPA, said that while states like California do have these tools, it's still encouraged and a great idea to use third-party products for a more full and broader protection overall. All right, so we're running up on 30 minutes. Let me see if I have anything else. This is very specific to us. So is this mainly a US issue or is it global? So the regulatory landscape differs by region, right? GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, like we mentioned. But overall, data aggregation is a problem worldwide. What I can say quickly is that the product that we have is geared toward individuals who have a presence here in the U.S. So we're not saying they have to be residents or citizens, but let's say if someone had lived here for a period of time, maybe have opened bank accounts, things of that nature, use their address, it's more geared toward that. A lot of the technologies that we have developed are exactly for that. Let me get to one last question before we let everyone go for today, and I think this is an important one. Thank you for the questions. This is a good one actually. Is data broker removal legal? Like for us to go there. Okay. Are these companies required to comply? This is another great one, which we get a ton from inbound customers and even customers who've already signed up. Yes, data broker opt-outs and deletion requests are completely illegal and even supported by regulations in many jurisdictions and countries even. Some platforms are required to provide opt-out mechanisms under laws like CCPA, as we mentioned a little earlier. Others operate under general consumer protection or privacy guidelines. So compliance processes vary by company, which is the difficult part. And that's the main reason why monitoring and follow-up is often necessary. So again, touching back on what we spoke about earlier, it isn't about doing it once, it's doing it over and over again, and that's where the problems can occur. I think that's good with our questions. Once again, we want to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. My QR code is still there. I'll also be sending out a follow-up email with the URL for opt-outs, as we had mentioned earlier, as well as the on-demand video. Expect that sometime tomorrow. There will also be a link there as well that if you'd like to discuss this in more detail, ask very specific questions that are tailored to your scenario and your situation, I'm more than happy and willing to answer these. Again, thank you on behalf of NetReputation, as well as us in Digital Privacy Protection. We want to say thank you for joining our webinar. Hope to hear from you soon and have a great day.